On August the 11th, 1991, 3 shows aired on the new Nickelodeon network. These shows were Doug, Ren and Stimpy, and Rugrats, and these were the first original Nicktoons. Later, in 1993, a 4th Nicktoon would begin airing called Rocko's Modern Life. A man named Stephen Hillenburg was one of the directors who worked on this show. He would soon go on to pitch his own show to Nickelodeon called SpongeBob. Then, 2 years later, on May the 1st, 1999, the world would get its first look at the new Spongebob Squarepants show. The episode aired straight after the Kids' Choice Awards and attracted 6.9 million viewers. The show then ran for 3 pretty much perfect seasons. Hillenburg's intention was to end the show after these 3 seasons with the SpongeBob movie, which concludes many storylines of the show and canonically happens after any subsequent episode. Like, it's weird if you think about it that actually Sponge on the Run and Sponge Out of Water are prequels to this film. The SpongeBob movie gives a proper send-off to the show. Plankton enacts his final Plan Z and then actually goes to jail. SpongeBob gets promoted to manager, both things that are not followed up on in later seasons. At the time, Hillenburg stated he didn't want the show to jump the shark and so didn't want to make any more episodes. However, as the film and TV show had done so well, Nick wouldn't allow the show to end, so Hillenburg stuck to his guns and resigned as the series showrunner. Although he no longer had a direct role in the series' production, he maintained an advisory role and would review each episode. During this time, Nickelodeon began milking the cash cow SpongeBob had become, promoting it more whilst other shows got pushed to the side. Very few shows around this time got more than a 1 or 2 season run before getting cancelled. Nickelodeon's plan seemed to be that if a show wasn't immediately as popular as SpongeBob, it would simply be replaced by more SpongeBob. This SpongeBob takeover can be further seen in extended media, with the game Nicktoons Unite coming out in America and then a few months later being renamed Spongebob Squarepants and Friends Unite in PAL regions, thereby showing that across the world the SpongeBob brand was far more recognisable than the Nicktoons one. And so it went on that most games when released outside of America would lose the Nickelodeon branding in favour of the SpongeBob branding. Until in 2008 when THQ would release their final Nicktoons game simply called Spongebob Squarepants featuring Nicktoons Globs of Doom in all territories. And then after this point THQ would focus solely on creating SpongeBob games until they eventually went bankrupt in 2012. During the 2010s, the Nicktoons branding seemed to have all but vanished. However, there were a couple of shows which seemed to escape the SpongeBob shadow, and those shows were The Loud House and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, both of these shows pulling in very decent ratings, with TMNT being especially lucrative in the merchandising front. However, Nickelodeon would then go on to do a similar thing that they did with SpongeBob in rebooting TMNT and giving The Loud House a spin-off, thereby further oversaturating the channel with less and less variety. As the network doubled down on SpongeBob content throughout the 2010s, the show suffered greatly. More and more episodes were being criticised for just being straight up bad, the characters were quickly becoming flanderised, and the entire show as a whole seemed to have become creatively bankrupt. And instead of the staff being allowed to take a break, they were instead forced to maintain a steady stream of episodes over the coming years, with the quality declining further and further. Later on, Hillenburg would return to the show in a more hands-on role. This led to a kind of renaissance in quality of the show, with many episodes from this era rivaling the quality of the original 3 seasons. Unfortunately, this wasn't to last, as Stephen Hillenburg did tragically die in 2018 of ALS. Once Stephen Hillenburg died, Nickelodeon began full force in expanding the SpongeBob franchise as much as it possibly could. Nickelodeon began making as many spin-offs as it could, Kamp Koral being the first, with the Patrick show coming soon after. There are also even confirmed spin-off movies coming, the first of these being based around Sandy Cheeks. The fact all this happened so soon after Stephen Hillenburg's death, it brings into question whether these spin-offs went against his wishes, and it has been widely contested whether Hillenburg knew of the spin-offs or not before his death. Paul Tibbett, the man Hillenburg assigned as showrunner when he originally departed the show, said, "I do not mean any disrespect to my colleagues who are working on this show, They are good people and talented artists, but this is some greedy, lazy executiving right here. And they all know full well Steve would have hated this. Shame on them. However, Tom Kenny, the voice of SpongeBob, has said of Kamp Koral, Hillenburg and we were a little unsure about the CGI thing too. SpongeBob is such a determinately 2D classic animated looking show. They were able to find a way to take the CGI and lend it the same squashy, stretchy, kinetic, the craziness of 2D classic animation. That was a puzzle they worked really, really hard to figure out, and I think we are still learning on Kamp Koral. I think it's fun to have to learn new tricks when you've been doing something for a while, so it doesn't become stale. So it seems that Hillenburg may have in fact known about and even been on board with this spin-off. But even if Hillenburg was in favour of Kamp Koral, it doesn't mean that he was in favour of the Patrick Show. As quoted in 2009, Hillenburg said, "The show is about SpongeBob, he's the core element, and it's about how he relates to the other characters. Patrick by himself might be a bit too much, so I don't see any spin-offs." So maybe his mind changed over the following decade, but I don't know, the timing just seems very coincidental. And then in February 2019, less than a year after Hillenburg's death, the new Nickelodeon president, Brian Robbins, vowed Nickelodeon would keep the show in production for as long as the network exists. Which, with streaming, shouldn't actually be too long. Now let's talk about each of these spin-offs. Kamp Koral was first introduced as a subplot in the third SpongeBob movie, Sponge on the Run, where it retconned how each character met SpongeBob. Despite most of the characters meeting for the first time at some point in Series 1, apparently they all met at Kamp Koral years prior. Some of this inconsistency is later explained in the show itself, with Sandy time travelling to talk to her younger self, but really it all feels like the same show, with CGI crowbarred in to appeal to modern audiences, and the characters all being aged down to appeal to younger audiences. The first episodes aired on March the 4th, 2021, and got viewing figures of around 500,000, which is quite a lot less than the original nearly 7 million the first actual episode of SpongeBob got. However, it has done well enough to get a second season, which should be coming out next year. Now, the second SpongeBob spin-off show, The Patrick Star Show, is far more difficult to describe. It's mostly just weird visuals and a constant barrage of short, non-sequitur randomness to wipe away any crumbs of a kid's attention span that hasn't already been taken by TikTok. You know, once there was an actual real-life scientific study on whether SpongeBob worsened kids' attention span, and it showed that it did. So God help any children that are watching The Patrick Show. Because after watching just a couple episodes of this show, I can't even, what? So the basic premise of the show is that Patrick used to have his own TV show when he lived with his family, but also not really, because it doesn't really talk about that. He kind of just does other weird nonsense things. Also, despite it being called the Patrick Star Show, other characters make regular appearances. SpongeBob is in it way more than I expected, to the point where some episodes barely feel like it's a different show at all. And because the show is so hyperactive and takes so much out of you, you can't really watch more than one episode at a time, which I think is the reason that Nickelodeon aired 5 episodes of this show and then had to take a 2-month break. The first 5 episodes aired between July and August and attracted around 500,000 viewers, and then it took a break until late October. Again, an audience of 500,000 viewers doesn't really seem like a lot, but Nickelodeon has decided to order additional episodes, so it must be doing quite well. And whilst these shows don't seem to be doing great on the actual Nickelodeon network, where it is doing well is on the streaming service Paramount+, as Paramount Plus recently tweeted that Spongebob Squarepants and its spin-offs are the most binge shows on the streaming service. So no wonder they've said things like they're open to making a Squidward Tentacles spin-off, or the actually confirmed Sandy Cheeks spin-off movie. The film is allegedly going to be a hybrid of animation and live action, so something similar to Alvin and the Chipmunks. The reason I feel like this film isn't going to work is because Sandy Cheeks over the last few years has become the most flanderized character out of all of SpongeBob. She used to be a very multi-layered character, being interested in things like karate, things like inventing, and also often being the voice of reason for SpongeBob and Patrick. However, in later seasons, she seems to have fallen into the inventor role, only really being present if the writers want to do a sci-fi story. So there we have it. It seems like we're only going to get more and more SpongeBob content as the years go on. So, although I believe SpongeBob has become too successful for its own good, recently it has been looking up for the other Nicktoons, as Nickelodeon recently did have a deal with Netflix to make films out of their legacy Nicktoons, including Invader Zim, Rocko's Modern Life, and Hey Arnold. There's also the Rugrats reboot which recently came out, and the new Nickelodeon games are featuring more legacy Nicktoons. There was even at one point rumours of a Nicktoons movie, and a Ren and Stimpy cinematic short. However, yeah, that's something we'll get to in another video.
So that's it. SpongeBob's just going to get more and more powerful, and he's not going to stop. It won't be long until he gets me. What was that? Oh, jeez. Jesus.